The Miami Hurricanes are strongly trending for one of the top linebackers in the class of 2025 and one of the top safeties in the class, and they're both going to be announcing within the next 4 days. This could be a decisive week for Miami recruiting.
You are Locked On Canes, your daily podcast on the Miami Hurricanes, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Happy Monday, if there is such a thing. I am Alex Donno, University of Miami alumnus, writer for allhurricanes.com, and co-host of Locked On ACC. Thank you so much to the everydayers for making Locked On Canes your first listen and your first watch today. We're available free wherever you get your podcasts. Free on YouTube. We're part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. The recruiting overlord is about to join us, and he's always brought to you by LinkedIn. These days, every new potential hire can feel like a high-stakes wager for your small business. That's why LinkedIn Jobs helps you find the right people for your team faster and for free. Post your job for free at linkedin.com/lockedoncollege. Terms and conditions apply. On this episode, we will explain why Miami has been identified as one of 5 programs under the most pressure heading into this coming football season. We're going to talk about a handful of talented 2026 prospects, I don't know why that word escaped me, who are potentially considering Miami. They were in action at Under Armour Future 50. Brian Smith was out there covering these guys. But, folks, this is going to be a decisive week for a couple of Miami's most important class of 2025 targets, and it's why we bring the recruiting overlord on with us. Now, Brian, I guess I'll go in order of when the announcements are here. So on July 4th, Independence Day, we're going to be getting an announcement from 4-star safety Hylton Stubbs, who recently decommitted from USC. He's been crystal balled to Miami. But before the Stubbs announcement, tonight, Monday, July 1st, we're going to be getting an announcement, good or bad. I think it's going to be good for Miami, from 4-star linebacker Gavin Nix out of IMG Academy. So let's start with Nix, Brian, as the crystal balls and the RPM predictions over the past couple of weeks have been coming in fast and furious for Miami's favor for this player who could become the 3rd linebacker to join the class. What do you think happens tonight with Nix?
He will be a Cane. That is my prediction. That's everything I've heard, and I have no reason to believe anything's changed in the last week or so. What is Miami getting? They're getting a middle linebacker that can actually cover in space and is going to come in physically ready to place. 225, 230. Gavin is an old school linebacker in the box, but he has the ability to run and cover well, and he's already in the shape. He plays at IMG. He understands the coverage concepts and stuff a lot more than a lot of high school kids do. I think Nicholson's going to like having him as a freshman. Not only they're going to have a special team, but I bet he plays some next year. Remember, Maui Noah is going to leave. He's an All-American candidate this year. It's going to be a big void. I'm not saying they won't go get a transfer or something, but Nix will help in some capacity. He's got that much talent. And I love watching him play because he can really hit, and he doesn't care where he's going. It's going to come with a big bell ringing at the end of it. So old school Miami linebacker.
So, and it's, by the way, the Gavin Nix announcement is coming 7:00 tonight. That's commitment o'clock for Miami. That's the time that they prefer.
It really is. It really is.
The fact that he's announcing at 7, it's like a spoiler. It's like they should have mixed it up a little bit to keep it on our toes a bit.
I'm not going to complain. It's early enough. I can get some stuff done afterwards. I'm happy with the time.
So on what Miami's, if Miami can get Nix over the finish line, of course, on what the class of 2025 linebacker recruits would look like then, Brian, because you had Elijah Melendez, who confirmed his Miami commitment after his official visit. He appears to be fully locked in now. Miami recently landed Ezekiel Marcelin from Miami Central. If you throw Gavin Nix into that trio, just talk about how those 3 complement each other.
All of them can run and play in space. That's the thing. The one that's most unique is Marcelin because he's a little bit smaller than the others and could run. I don't know exactly how they will use him, but that's okay. I trust Nicholson to figure that out. That's what he makes a lot of money to do. They finally get 3 guys in a class that I think are stout enough, powerful enough. They played at the right program. They've all played at programs that matter. They will come into college football a little more advanced. There won't be many groups above them in any school, LSU, USC, Ohio State, anywhere that has 3 linebackers like that. Then they just got to compete and figure it out. Almost every class, no matter how many good players you have, there's going to be one guy at every spot that doesn't make it. Miami's getting enough good ones. It'll take care of itself. But all three of those guys are good enough to play major Power 4 football. Miami's at a great spot here. I don't think they could complain about this any given year. So good for them.
So, all right, let's go to the defensive backfield. Now, the last time you and I spoke, it was midweek last week, Brian, and it seemed like maybe closer to a 50-50 between Miami and the Florida Gators for four-star safety Hylton Drake Stubbs, who recently decommitted from you. Actually, I don't think he had officially decommitted the last time we spoke.
Yeah, it was right before, if I remember right.
Yeah, it was right before. So he has decommitted. There was definitely some Florida buzz. Maybe there still is, but the momentum has moved into Miami's favor to the point where, Brian, I've seen some of the Florida recruiting experts basically saying, yeah, it's probably not going to happen for the Gators this week. They won't stop recruiting Stubbs, who, as you pointed out to us, he grew up a Florida Gators fan. He's from Jacksonville, so it's right in Gator country. But when he scheduled his announcement time, which is going to be July 4th, that's when people realize it's probably going to be Miami. Do you think it's going to be Miami for Hylton Drake Stubbs?
He gave his visit a 10, and everything has been trending that way. Like, why would I not think so? There's a lot of chatter, not just about Stubbs. A lot of kids are still very worried about whether or not Napier is going to be there next year. I think if Napier was on great standing, he would go play for UF. He is a Gators fan. Here's the irony. His brother is at Florida State. He grows up a Gators fan, and he's apparently going to pick Miami. Welcome to recruiting. There's nothing about that beginning that makes you think he's going to end up in Coral Gables, but this is why relationships matter. Recruiting, Miami staff does as good as anybody in the country, building relationships. Stubbs is a kid, they didn't care where they were on the pecking order. They never slowed down in recruiting him. Nicholson and the entire defensive staff have done a great job with like the linebacker, getting that to where it needs. Secondary is like the last part, and everybody, it's all hands on deck with that. You got to get guys like this if you're going to get over the top. Miami needs to stop having to go to the portal. This is a kid that can play early. Stubbs is very, very good. He'll probably play some as a freshman, if not start, wherever he goes. This is how you get over the top. It's the last hurdle for Miami's defense.
It's another top 20-25 player I wanted to ask you about. Now, I don't think he has a specific announcement date that's been put out there yet. I may be wrong about this, so I don't know how soon we're expecting this one to come off the board, but Miami has received multiple predictions to land interior offensive lineman, probably the center of the future if he comes to Miami, S.J. Alofaituli from Bishop Gorman. In fact, Steve Wiltfong just dropped a Fong bomb over the weekend for S.J. to come to the U. Are you hearing similar sentiments about him?
That's been the school that was slowly trending, but I didn't know it had moved that far. Steve isn't going to put that out just for fun. Like, there's got to be a reason for it. And for those that don't know, S.J. is not a kid that's real media friendly at this point. He's kind of done with that. So Steve has gotten that from somebody on a staff or something. That's about the only way you're really going to get that confirmation. I think this is a really good sign for them because Miami the last 2 years have had to go to the portal to get their center, and that's a super important spot at the pivot. He can be your 2 to 3 year start. I don't know if he'll start as a freshman. That's probably asking a lot. Miami maybe move somebody to center next year, whatever, get another transfer. Then they're going to be good for a while. This kid is elite. Not this summer, but last summer, he was the best O-lineman I saw at Future 50. He's as good a lineman as there is in the country. Extremely technically sound. He's great program. He plays Bishop Gorman. But this is another kid. Miami's targeting kids from programs that are elite. They will have less of a climb to make that jump. And there's still some, don't get me wrong, but there'll be less of a climb to adjust to the Power 4 level. Elite player.
Now, Brian Smith just mentioned last year's Future 50. He was just out at this year's. He just got back from Bradenton, Florida, scouting some of the top 2026 players, including a handful of these. Miami is very much in the mix for. Right. We'll also talk later on about why Miami's program is under pressure heading into this coming season. So, folks, we're only getting started. It's a Monday. I'm going to try to make this Monday as palpable as possible for you. You want to keep it locked right here on this brand new episode of Locked On Canes. And I already know you're keeping it locked to FanDuel. Guys, I know the playoffs are over in the NBA and NHL. I love sports so much. I never want them to stop. Even as the playoffs are done, we get fewer games. The sports aren't sportsing like I want them to, but they are still sportsing. I've got Copa America bets, Euro bets. I had UFC bets over the weekend. FanDuel lets me keep the sports going whenever I want. All I have to do is open the app and dream up bets anytime I'm in the mood at FanDuel. And this summer, FanDuel is hooking up all customers with a boost or bonus daily. That's right. There's something for everyone every day, all summer long. So head over to FanDuel.com/lockedon and start making the most out of your summer. FanDuel, official sports betting partner of Major League Baseball. Thank you so much for making this Monday episode of Locked On Canes your first listen and your first watch today. Locked On has launched the first ever national sports 24/7 streaming channel on YouTube, and now it's also available on Amazon Fire TV and the free Fire TV Channels app. It's called Locked On Sports Today, and it's here for you 24/7, covering the top sports stories of the day with the local experts of Locked On, plus our national shows covering every league. Find Locked On Sports Today now available on the free Fire TV Channels app. We have the recruiting overlord, Brian Smith, with us. Brian just got back from Under Armour Future 50, and a player, you kept filling my inbox with information, and I appreciate it, about 2026 athlete Derrek Cooper, who seemed to be the top player at that event. You can correct me if I'm wrong. One of my questions for you is, do you think he's a running back or a linebacker or both at the next level?
I don't care is the answer. At this event, they usually just put a kid at one spot, and that's where he works. There are a handful of guys, Derrek being one, that played multiple spots. They're so gifted, it's just like, okay, go work with the running backs for a while, go do this one, but go catch some passes. Derrek is elite at everything. And when I had a long interview with him, and we're talking about where he's being recruited and this and that, he's like, Alabama, North Carolina, Georgia like me at running back. Most schools are kind of open-minded, but some are kind of leaning towards linebacker. And he's like overwhelmed by the recruiting attention. He's kind of backed off his Georgia commitment, it sounds like. But
right.
Miami's all over him. So is UF, Florida State, and pretty much the rest of the free world. I don't know where he's going to play. I think he would rather play running back at the college level, but it's not like a huge deal. Watching him go through drills, though, with his feet, and he's 210-ish, something like that, he looks like a second or third year college player, but he's going to his junior year of high school. He's been coached well, and he's at Chaminade now, if I remember right. So that kind of helps. And there's just no way guys at his size are supposed to move like he does laterally. That's the difference. He can make guys miss like he's a 170-pound player as a running back, and he can also stay up with them in pass protection or in pass coverage when he's on deep. Like, he's just unique. Miami is all over him. It's the program he's most familiar with. They are prioritizing him like no other. But this is a long battle. We will be talking quite a bit about Derrek until signing day next year. He's an elite player. Nobody's going to give up on him. Georgia wants him really badly. That kind of puts things in perspective. But Miami is probably the team I would watch here.
Now, since we're talking about 2026s, I probably could have brought this up in the opening, but I didn't want to confuse too many people with there's 2025s and then class of 2026s. Sure. But Brian, when I talk about this being a decisive week in recruiting for Miami, I think they're going to land a 2026 prospect this week. And if anyone out there is not excited because it's an extra year down the road, you should be, because I'm strongly expecting Miami to land 2026 quarterback Dereon Coleman later on this week, Brian. He's going to be announcing on the 3rd of July. So if things go the way I expect them to go, you could be landing Gavin Nix on the 1st, Dereon Coleman on the 3rd, Hylton Drake Stubbs on the 4th. This is going to be one of the craziest weeks, but what can you tell the folks out there about Dereon Coleman? Because again, I know we're talking an extra year down the road, but this could be Miami's quarterback of the future in a few years.
I first met him when he was going from 8th to 9th grade, and the head coach at Lakeland had told me about him. Marvin, great guy. He's like, this kid's really good. And I'm looking over, I'm like, dude, he's $130. What are you talking about? He's like, I'm telling you, this kid's really good. I'm like, okay. And he goes out there. He looks like he can't throw it 5 yards, but he's just got a natural arm. Real skinny kid. He's finally up to 160 pounds. He's now at Jones High School in Orlando. Incredibly intelligent. Post-snap reads are what he focuses on. Amen to that, because that's the bottom line on whether or not you're going to develop. It's really hard. If you don't figure it out, though, you're not going to be a guy that ever makes it to the NFL level. So accurate, very decisive, pocket guy, but he can run. He just tries to avoid. He's not the biggest guy. And I would imagine he'll top up around 200 pounds when he's filled out. but he's finally started to add the weight. And that's why his ranking's not quite as high, but he's as accurate as any quarterback in the class of 26. Incredibly accurate. Now, if Miami gets him early, here's the bonus. Receivers around the state know who he is. All these guys play with him in 7-on-7. It'll also help Miami from that perspective. When you get your quarterback early, especially a school that's in state like Florida, that's really beneficial. The receivers will like that.
Love that. Now, another player you just scouted at Future 50 is linebacker Simeon Caldwell out of Jacksonville.
Yep.
What can you tell me about this player, and is Miami firmly in the mix for him?
Absolutely. He plays at the Bowl School. It's a boarding school up there, in case somebody didn't know. His dad was a big-time player. He's a coach in the NFL, coached linebackers. He's transitioning from safety to linebacker. He's about 190 pounds. He's playing middle linebacker just to get used to it, but he's almost 6'4" now. His frame is just starting to fill out. He'll be 225, 230 when he's done. Great kid, elite academic student. Ohio State, Notre Dame, Florida State, Miami, and Florida. Those are the schools to watch. Not exactly a shocking list for a kid from the Bowl School. He could go anywhere amongst those group, and Miami's squarely in the mix. With Nicholson there, they're always going to be in the mix for elite linebackers. Caldwell's definitely one of them.
Now, since you were just out there in Bradenton, I'm sure you had a big fat notebook out there scouting all these top players. Any of the other top 26s, players we haven't mentioned yet, who really stood out to you, and maybe names that Miami fans could know or should know moving forward?
There was a surprise, and this is why these things are so important. There's a kid named Jaden Pettit, is a big-bodied receiver that plays at First Baptist Academy. It's a smaller program in Naples, but he's on the radar. Like, he fits the profile when you walk up to, okay, he's a player. His dad's a huge Miami fan, and because his dad he rooted for Florida State, but he's been to Miami twice. He really likes him. They're recruiting him hard. And this is a kid that's going to have a ton of offers. And he played really well at the event. He's got great hands. He's got the size you're looking for. This could be a Miami-Florida State battle. It's a South Florida kid. It kind of fits the profile from all the things that you and I grew up with. That's a kid you should know. His name, again, is Jaden Pettit. Aiden Pouncey's a kid that people probably should know. The kid from Winter Park, the Pouncey name kind of speaks for itself. Elite athleticism and size. He's 6'2", 6'3", and playing corner. If he can stick a corner at that size, I want to be his agent. Those are the kids that all the college coaches want. He has the ability to change direction, man, at that size. Look out. So UCF, Florida State, Miami, Oregon, Georgia, the usual suspects. But Miami's, again, they're in on all these 26 kids. And another guy that I think it could be Miami in the end, might be the best linebacker in the country. We're back to that spot, is Isaiah Williams. He's from Tavares. It's just a little bit north of Orlando. Miami is the school coming at him probably the hardest. He's technically committed to Syracuse, but I don't think that's going to hold. Elite player. He'll have 50 offers.
I love it. Yeah, you were talking about Jaden Pouncey, and obviously his last name is very familiar. He's what, like a cousin or a nephew of Mike and Marquise? The Pouncey.
Yeah, he's been that family.
Some kind of relation. Yeah,
the Pouncey family is so athletic.
Yeah.
It's insane.
Yeah. No doubt about that. All right, so when we come back, why was Miami named one out of these top 5 programs that are under pressure for the upcoming season? And should we take that as a positive or a negative? I've got a feeling on that. You guys want to keep it locked right here. We're not done yet with the recruiting overlord on this new episode of Locked On Canes. Thank you so much for making this episode of Locked On Canes your first listen and your first watch today. For the everydayers out there, you want to take that everydayer experience to the next level, sign up to become a Locked On Canes insider. I include a link in the show description below. When you sign up, you can try it free for 14 days. You get recruiting scoops, breaking news, question and answers with me. You get text messages directly from my phone to yours when you become a Locked On Canes insider. So click that link below. Try it free for 14 days. Then if you like it, you can opt in for $4.99 a month. Give you a lot of added value on there on the Locked On Canes Insiders chat. All right, so Brian, this new report came out from Pro Football Focus's Mitch Kaiser. He ranked Miami as one of 5 programs that he feels are under the most pressure this coming season. The other 4 are Florida, Ole Miss, Ohio State, and Penn State. Now, I kind of want to contrast the pressure that's on Miami versus the pressure that's on Florida, because I definitely agree there's a lot of pressure on both. That's one of the things that makes that opening game August 31st so interesting. But Do you feel like there's more of a negative energy when it comes on the Florida side because they've got the toughest schedule in the country and they've got a head coach who could get on the hot seat really quick there in Billy Napier? Like it's hard to imagine Florida being a college football playoff contender really by nature of their schedule. Whereas in Miami, I think the pressure and, I'm sure two people could look at this, whether you're glass half empty or glass half full, say this is really bad or this is really good. But I think with the roster that Miami has compiled and a relatively on paper, a manageable schedule coming up this year, I think there's pressure because people think Miami could be really good this year. I think that's where the pressure comes from on the Miami side.
I had somebody tell me, if not now, when? And I didn't have an answer.
Wow.
Schedule is there. I'm not saying to go beat Georgia in the title game, but like they should win 10 games this year. And I've said this before here on the show. My buddy Elliott is a Florida State alum, fan, hates Miami, the whole 9 yards. And he said, if I'm betting one way or the other, it's 10 wins or more. He said minimum they're going to win 10 games this year. Bud hates Miami. If that doesn't tell you anything, but he's a gambler. Like he tells it like it is when you get on these win. He loves that stuff.
Yeah.
He said 9.5. I'm taking over every time. I was like, okay. And he did it like this. No hesitation. He goes, look at their freaking schedule. It's the opposite of last year. They got the Noles at home. They don't have Clemson, if I remember right. If they get by the Florida game, just had this pulled up. I mean, and I know the Florida game, you're playing in the swamp, even if it's a bad team, it's still the swamp. That place is nuts. If you've ever been there as a fan, you got to go there to understand. It is crazy. Their next few games, no offense, they should be 4-0. They play Florida A&M at home. They got Ball State at home. I mean, for the love of God, if they're not 3-0, if they beat Florida after that, there's a problem. Then they go to USF. I mean, they screw around, they could lose, but they should be 4-0 going into conference play. That's a great way to start your season. And Virginia Tech, while good, isn't great. Then your first road game on the conference, Cal.
Yeah.
Look, there's pressure to do that. My only question is, can they finalize in big games?
Yeah.
The Florida State game's a coin. It's a 3-point game one way or the other. In most, years kind of coming down to the end. It probably will be again this year because they're both really good. They need to find a way to win, and it's got to be a coach. I'm sure you've seen some of the predictions in magazines that weren't very favorable towards a certain coach at Miami, but that's part of this pressure too. He needs it to go that way to get that perception off. So I'm curious. I can't remember if it was Wendy's or which one, but they had Miami with 14 all-conference players, the first, second, and third team, and Clemson with 5, but they put Clemson ahead of Miami. Yeah, that's pretty rough. So that's part of this pressure, though. Like, can this staff maximize the talent? I need to see it too. But I mean, their roster might be the best in the Atlantic Coast Conference. You could make a strong argument for that.
Yeah, I had Dalton Wasserman on last week, who was a Pro Football Focus analyst, and he said the same thing. He's definitely not a Miami fan. He was respectful of Miami, but he doesn't have a horse in the race. And he just said, yeah, they've got the most talented roster in the conference, in his opinion, right? Because he looked at Miami. He didn't guarantee they would win the conference for everything you just said, because they have to prove it. But he did say probably the most balanced team when it comes to offense and defense, right? Because a lot of these other programs, like for Clemson, their hallmark is their defense. You're worried about their offense. He basically threw out for Florida State, who are the odds-on favorites to win the conference. They've got so many new pieces in place, it's a little bit harder to handicap them. So he was very high on Miami's roster. And, of course, he is from the same publication that this story came out of. So here's what Mitch Kaiser from PFF said about Miami, why he considers them to be under pressure. He said, quote, "The Hurricanes have experienced recent letdowns, including 2 straight 3-5 conference records, but something about the 2024 team feels different," he says. "With the addition of star quarterback Cam Ward, the sky might be the limit for this offense, which also has arguably the best slot receiver in college football in Xavier Restrepo," Kaiser said. Yeah, we all should be high on Xavier Restrepo. PFF is very high on X because he puts up those numbers last year. He was one of the top receivers in the country. So, yeah, I mean, I think most people agree, and I'm not going to call this a weakness because there's just so many unproven players there, but a question mark, Brian, would be Miami's defensive secondary, just because they're going to have some young players who haven't proven it yet. Other than that, Miami looks pretty stacked at most position groups.
I don't think anything other than the secondary gives me serious pause.
Yeah.
I mean, you don't know how Cam's going to do in the swamp. That's that's an individual game. But, I mean, he's played against Oregon. It doesn't get much louder than playing against Oregon. So I'm curious if he can handle that, and his fumbling issue. Had 14 fumbles last year at Washington State. That bothers me, but it's going to get better. But other than the secondary, like you just look at the depth chart. You and I have talked about this off air numerous times. This is the best Miami depth chart since 17.
Yeah. And it might, honestly, it might be better than 17. Like I'll have to go back and I might have to do a direct comparison of the two. I haven't done that, but yeah, I remember feeling like the 17 team, it felt like they overachieved when they started 10-0. If this team did that, I don't think I'd feel like they're overachieving just based on the roster.
I think the schedule combined with this is definitely Miami's best offensive line since the early 2000s. I'm steadfast with that. When you can grind that out, and you got to hope that Fletcher's healthy earlier in the season than later, so you're not wearing out the new guy. But I mean, every spot has a guy you're like, okay, he can get drafted. And not in 3 years, like they got a sophomore or junior that might turn pro that's at every spot that has a chance. You know what I mean? And it's just like, there's no reason to think they can't. But last year, you and I were ready on so many levels. Okay, they're ready to take that next step. And they just shot themselves in the foot. So everybody's on the same boat. You got to show us. We cover Miami, and we're saying that. So I'm sure the players are tired of hearing it. I'm sure Cristobal and his staff are too, but proof's in the pudding. I need to see them win games because of decisions on the field and players making clutch plays, period.
Well said, as always. He's Brian Smith. You want to follow him on X at FBScout_Florida. Also, check out his work at allhurricanes.com. And, we were talking about his experience at Under Armour Future 50. He's written multiple articles about it at allhurricanes.com. So if you want to know more about some of the top players in the class of 2026, some of which could very well end up being Miami Hurricanes, you want to check that out at allhurricanes.com. Brian, thank you so much for the time, and we'll talk to you again soon.
Absolutely, buddy. I appreciate it.
And thanks to everyone for making Locked On Canes your first listen and your first watch today. Make sure to subscribe, Apple Podcasts, Spotify, wherever you get your pods, YouTube. Subscribe to our YouTube channel. Hit that like button. Hit that thumbs up if you enjoyed this episode. If you didn't enjoy this episode, hit the thumbs up anyway. Why not? It's free. And if there is some breaking news tonight, I think there might be, we will be on again. Don't worry. We're going to have an emergency episode if need be. We might have a few of those this week. So we'll talk to you again next time on another episode of Locked On Canes. We are part of the awesome Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.